right, well, thank you all so much for joining us for a visit with the Lowell National Historical Park. Lowell's water-powered textile mills catapulted the nation, including immigrant families and early female factory workers, into an uncertain new industrial era. Nearly 200 years later, the changes that began there still reverberate in our shifting global economy and serve as a living testament to the dynamic human story of the Industrial Revolution. And this afternoon's program is led by National Park Ranger Emma Mitchell. So all 150 of us or so who are watching live, and the many more that will watch the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Emma for joining us here today. And Emma, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Robert. I really appreciate the introduction. Hello, folks. Again, my name is Emma, in case you didn't catch it the 8 times we've already said it. But I am here in Lowell National Historical Park here in Lowell, Massachusetts, next door to some of you, across the country from the rest of you. So anyway, we're here in Lowell, Massachusetts. I was started here as a seasonal ranger in 2018. I was really lucky to be hired as a permanent ranger back in 2023. I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary of being here and being a permanent ranger. So I'm very excited to kind of spend this anniversary time with all of you and give you a lot of my knowledge that I know about this park, which is very near and dear to me. I started my career in Yellowstone at the age of 14 as a volunteer, and I've worked in other capacities in other parks such as Boston National Historical Park and Acadia National Park, which led me here to Lowell, which is pretty exciting. I am a transplant here to New England, and I've really become a New Englander, so happy to talk about that anytime. All right, so Lowell National Historical Park is one very special place. Oop, here we go. Oh no, so sorry. Here we go. There we go. All right, so our mission statement here at Lowell National Historical Park is it preserves and protects the historic structures and stories of the Industrial Revolution and its legacies in Lowell, serving as a catalyst for revitalization of the city's physical and economic environment and in promoting cultural heritage and community programming. So that embodies everything that we do here in the park. We have a saying that we also like to use is the city is the park and the park is the city, because we're all over downtown Lowell. We do not have a physical boundary like other national parks, so we're really incorporated into the community, telling community stories and being a huge part of this town. This park really consists of mostly buildings and stories of people. We're not so much of a natural environment place like, again, Yellowstone, Acadia, Cape Cod, those big national parks. That's not quite us. We'll talk more about the actual locations that you can visit here in the park later on. But the number one reason why we are here, and even though I just said we're not so much of an environmental park or natural landscape, but the Merrimack River is really this whole basis of this park and why we are here. So just like other national parks, geology does play a big role in our story. We're going to jump back to 18,000 years.
So Emma, can you hear me? Yes. So Emma, we can't hear you. We lost your audio about 15 to 20 seconds ago. You were saying 18,000 years ago, and then the audio cut out. Yeah, we still can't hear you. We can see you. We can see your screen. We can see you. But something has happened with the audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
But can you see me now?
We cannot.
Oh boy. All
But
right.
that's okay. We can see your screen, Emma. I think in this case, both would be great. But if we had to choose, I would choose your voice because we can at least still see your slides.
Fantastic. Give me just a second here. Okay. We might come back, we might not with the camera. So
That's okay.
I deeply apologize about that though. I actually went through the whole pandemic never using Zoom once. So this is also a very big day for me.
That's
All right.
okay. And happy anniversary, Emma.
Thank you so much. All right, we were talking about geology because as a national park, we are excited about geology, and we live on a big rock. So again, 18,000 years ago, there was a huge ice shield covering this area, pretty much all of North America, called the Laurentide Ice Shield, otherwise known as a glacier. It stayed for thousands of years, and it eventually receded. But as it receded and moved farther north, for example, around the North Pole, it carved all the mountains and rivers of New England. So that is really what created the Merrimack River, this very big glacier. That river today is 117 miles long, and it starts with the confluence of the Pemigewasset and Winnipesaukee rivers. The river continues south, and it enters the Atlantic Ocean in Newburyport, Massachusetts. Jumping fast forward a couple thousand more years, human history here in the Lowell area has been here for 12,000 years. So it is deeper than just European settlement. And most of the people that lived here, they called themselves the Pennacook, and they really relied on the Merrimack River for hunting and fishing and transportation. So remember, today I am going to talk mostly about 200 years of history, but human history has been here a lot longer. All right, so the Pennacook had a village here, and it was called Wamiset, and that does play later on into our story. All right, so, oh, I apologize. Got ahead of myself. All right, so by the 1650s, there is European settlement in the area. It is a small village at this time. That it's called East Chelmsford. It's changed from the name Wamiset to East Chelmsford. And it is really just a few small family farms, and there are a few grist mills and sawmills. So we are starting to see production, but it's not going to be the mass production that we see later on in the 1800s. So it's very small, and it is very quiet, very rural still at that time. But the first sort of industrialization to happen here in the area is the Pawtucket Canal. So the canals were all the rage in Europe. Everybody really wanted to have a canal. Canals were a cheaper way to transport goods and move things around, which is very important. But the Pawtucket Canal was built to bypass Pawtucket Falls. And Pawtucket Falls is sort of, if you're looking at the map, it's going to be on the left side of the screen where that arrow is, the big white arrow. As a park ranger, I should say that's more of the western side, but we'll say it's the white arrow on the left. And Pawtucket Falls will play more into our story in just a minute. I just want to check. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you, Emma.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, I'm just a little nervous about that. So,
don't worry.
So the Pawtucket Canal was built between 1792 and was completed in 1796, and it was financed by the proprietors of locks and canals. This is one of the oldest businesses or LLCs in the United States, and they still have some influence today on the canals, which is really interesting to think about. But proprietors of locks and canals hired local farmers to first dig this first canal. And again, this is to bypass the Pawtucket Falls so that they can get goods from New Hampshire, primarily lumber, down and around the falls to head to Newburyport, because there are huge shipbuilding yards in Newburyport that were key to American industry, early American industry. And so if you put logs over a waterfall, unfortunately, they don't last. So that's why the Pawtucket Canal was first built. But in 1811, Newburyport suffers a huge fire, and all of their shipbuilding yards are burned down. So that kind of left the Pawtucket Canal and not, it was not needing to be used. By then, the Middlesex Canal, which is another big thing in our area here, the Middlesex Canal has been built and is a little more useful. So the Pawtucket Canal sat in disrepair for a couple decades. But a few men found it, and they called themselves the Boston Associates. The Boston Associates are a group of men from New England in general. We have Francis Cabot Lowell starting on the left, the silhouette. We have Patrick Tracy Jackson, Abbott Lawrence, Nathan Appleton, and Amos Lawrence. So these are a group of men that call themselves the Boston Associates, and they're all highly educated and wealthy. They're influential families in New England, and they have been here really, their families had been here since early settlement. They're also all related somehow, either by blood or by marriage. So they're a very tight-knit group of people. This group also were the first investors in Francis Cabot Lowell's first mill, which was in Waltham, Massachusetts. And speaking of that first mill, it was called the Boston Manufacturing Company. It was started in 1813 by those associates and Francis Cabot Lowell, and this mill was revolutionary. It was revolutionary because before then, all the steps to make cotton fabric, which was, again, a whole new industry that England had already been taking part of for about 50 years, and the US wanted to have influence in it as well. But in England, they had all these different mills for all the different steps. So you'd have a whole building just for spinning. You would have a whole building just for weaving. And that worked fine and well, except you had to take all this time to move goods in between and two different buildings, maybe to different towns. So it wasn't the most efficient. But this mill was revolutionary because they put that whole system all under one roof. So it would enter as raw cotton and it would leave as finished fabric. And that was great. But they wanted to expand this mill. It was successful for a while. It was right on the Charles River. But unfortunately, when they were doing some research and wanted to expand, they discovered that river was not going to be powerful enough. The Charles River is a lot like a lazy river at a resort you go to on spring break, and it was just not going to cause the power that they needed to run all their looms and machines for more mills. So they went searching for a new location. So they found themselves in 1821 in this area known as East Chelmsford, where I'm standing today. This location was ideal because there was already one canal. Remember, we had the Pawtucket Canal. And they also have two different water sources to fill all those canals. The Pawtucket did need some repairs and improvements. It hadn't been used in a few years. They mostly really needed to make it wider and deeper, so it wasn't so much a transportation canal, but it also doubled as a power canal to bring water into the area. In addition to that, so remember on our left side on the map, we have our falls. So from around that whole point to where the Concord River comes in, it's about a mile, there's a 32-foot drop in elevation. That drop in elevation is ideal because it's not what the Charles River had, and that's what's going to help create the force and make that water move a little quicker that they need in order to do all of the building and expanding that they would like to do. All right, so next, this is Pawtucket Falls. This is not the same dam that we have today. This is from the early 1900s, but it gives you a great idea of just how powerful that river can be. We also know with all the flooding that we've had in the last year or so, and as well as the Mother's Day flood from a while back, that this river can really hold a lot of water, and that means it can power all these machines that they're going to need it to. All right, so Lowell was officially established in 1826. So they had started building mills, specifically the Merrimack Manufacturing Company, before it was even established as a town for Lowell. And Lowell was named after Francis Cabot Lowell. He was the namesake because he really thought up this whole idea of a planned industrial city, and that was why they named it after him. So between 1821 and 1826, there's exponential growth in the area. This whole town was planned out completely, between having boarding houses to having a church. It was completely all planned. It's really the first planned, large-scale planned industrial town in the United States. So like I said, the Merrimack Manufacturing Company is the first one to open, and they really begin production in 1823. Construction is just a constant in this area at the time. They started really with the canals and then led to more boarding houses, a church, and then other businesses started to move in. Of course, they needed a bank, so Lowell 5 Bank moves in, and other businesses in downtown. But that first big undertaking is the canals. And these are great maps that show the construction over time and what canals came first. And you can see that we have the Pawtucket Canal, and then that first Merrimack Canal for the Merrimack Manufacturing Company is what's coming in next. I appreciate that they try to name a canal with the mill. That really helps out a lot. So in short, these canals were used basically to power everything. The canals that are really in downtown area, though, that you see as you cross the street, things like that, those are mostly power canals. So they're smaller, and they're just going to be for power production. They're not going to be so much for bringing barges and goods in. That's still going to be the Pawtucket Canal. The canals were built in stages, just like the mills. So as you can see in these maps, you have the first couple sets, then they keep adding them. So with all this construction comes various labor forces that are moving into the area as well, because there's a lot of great opportunity. So the canals were first improved upon by a group of Irishmen from Boston. They had walked up. There's a group of 30 of them, led by a man named Hugh Kaminsky. He had been a canal designer and builder in England during their Industrial Revolution, and he saw an opportunity here in Lowell. So he brought his first group of men, and they're really the first big group to move into the city. They have recruited more people to come and work in the canals. But there were tons of people that worked in the canals. There were many, many jobs, obviously the construction, and later when the construction was completed, they needed maintenance constantly. So they are a really big part of our story here. So today we have 5.6 miles of canals left that you can come and see if you come and see the city. And that really is a majority of what had been built. It's a very small portion that has been destroyed and filled in. Keeping canals was a big part of revitalization in the city and the importance of telling our history here. All right, so besides people working in the canals, we also needed other people to work in the mills. And since this was a whole planned city, there was a lot of thought put into who else was going to work into these work in these mills. And that included who is not working at that time, who doesn't have as many opportunities. And that big chunk of people is young women. There really weren't any careers for them at that time. Nursing really had not been a developed career yet. Teaching is mostly a male-saturated market in New England, so women would have had to move west. Things like secretaries or switchboard operators, which we kind of think as classic female careers, also had not been invented yet. So young women, mostly rural, already knew how to spin and weave. Spinning and weaving, it was a big part of Yankee home life for a good chunk of the beginning of the United States. So young women were recruited to work in those capacities here in the mill. So spinning and weaving, but there's some other smaller jobs off of that they did as well. So these mill girls, when they came to live in boarding houses. And that's really important because at that time, there really wasn't housing that you could just go rent. So boarding houses were a really common thing in a lot of developed urban areas. Also, it was really uncommon for women to just live on their own. So these boarding houses were really important. Excuse me. So boarding houses also gave a sense of family and structure that young women may have missed when they came to live here. It also gave a sense of security for them as well. Boarding houses were run by boarding house keepers who really maintained a strict code of conduct for these girls in their homes, and they also had to follow codes of conduct for work. So the big catch, though, is that they could come and live in these boarding houses, but they did have to pay for them. So at the end of the week when they got paid, room and board did come out before it was given to them. So they did pay to live here, but parents felt better knowing that their children, their daughters, were protected when they went to move to Lowell, which was a big undertaking for a lot of people. All right, so the life of a mill girl. On and off the clock, like I said, there are strict codes of conduct. Your days were very long, 14 hours, even longer, some parts of the year, depending on the sunlight. And these codes of conduct and these long days were they were enforced by boarding house keepers and mill managers. So you can see on the left there, it is a little hard to see, but there's a timetable of the Lowell mills. So that shows when the bells would ring for certain things. A lot of these girls had already been used to long days of farm work. I don't know about you, but I've done farm work, and some days it is more than 14 or 16-hour days. The big benefit is that when the bell rang at the end of the day, you were done working. You didn't have to go back out and milk cows or go take care of your loom. You were done for the day. So that was a big draw. What free time they did have, there were lots of opportunities for lectures, church outings. They had book clubs. They had other social things that they went and did. And eventually, as downtown was developed, there were other shops and restaurants that they could enjoy as well. Mill girls also had their own newspaper. It's called the Lowell Offering. It's there on the right. And so that was another big thing, is that because all these girls had come in from different places, and of course, an exchange of ideas and mingling of minds, lots of different things occurred, which included, with all these exchange of ideas, there were turnouts, an attempt for better working conditions for all of them all around. Some were successful, some not so much, some it still took a long time. All right, so by 1876, the population is 70,000. This is post-Civil War, and Lowell is still doing very well by that time. They were still creating lots and lots of fabric, sending it out. There are other industries that have become a big part of Lowell as well. For example, patent medicine. If anybody loves the classic soda Moxie, that started as a patent medicine here in Lowell, Massachusetts, and I am a Mainer now, and so I do have to admit it came from Lowell, and I'm happy to have that argument with anybody who'd like to have it. Also, in the starting in the 1850s, we start to have mass waves of other people, other groups of people emigrating to the United States and coming to Lowell for great opportunities for work. It starts with the Irish in the 1840s and the French Canadians in the 1850s. And the Portuguese, Swedish, Greek, Russian, Jewish, Lithuanian, Armenian, and Syrian Lebanese people are all coming into the city around this time. These are just a couple of really great photos to show what life was like. This is really in between like the 1870s and like the 19 teens, so it covers a bit of time. But some interesting photos from that time. So, oops, excuse me. Next, there is, this is a postcard from the 19 teens. This is showing an area called the Mile of Mills. And this is pretty much the whole river walk. If anybody has ever come to do that, I highly recommend it if you haven't. And it was all industrialized, all mills. You can see that there's also smokestacks. Around the 1850s, 1860s is when they start to use steam power. There was coal for a little bit, not super long, but you can just tell that there's going to be a lot of pollution from these mills, and it's all being dumped into the river. So we do have to acknowledge that there has been huge ecological impacts here in the area, and we're still coming back from it. We're going to keep coming back from it, but things are looking up. So some of these buildings in this photo still stand today. Part of it is UMass Lowell, and some of it is actually our museum where I'm standing today. So if you haven't done that river walk, come and check it out. Right. Turn of the century, Lowell in 1912 is much bigger. It's on both sides of the river, and there are many different neighborhoods of people that are making Lowell home, and most of them are working in the mills. So a lot of this is still standing today. Of course, we're Little Canada right along the river, and the Greek neighborhood and the Portuguese, the Acre is nestled right in there, and the Acre is the oldest neighborhood in the city. And it's still a revolving door of people today. And the Acre is it's an incredible spot. And we have a whole junior ranger program dedicated to it here in Lowell. And it's the only program in the National Park Service to be about a neighborhood. So I also recommend coming to check that out and checking out the the Acre. Eventually, Lowell did go into decline. It started right before the Great Depression. Mills were already moving to the American South. They were trying to have cheaper labor, have the cotton be closer to the mills, which was really important to save costs on transportation. World War I and World War II did have an uptick in production due to the war effort, but that was short-lived. Eventually, by the 1960s, all the mills had closed. There were a few companies such as Wang Computers that had moved in, but again, short-lived for the most part. So the city really fell into disrepair. Things were pretty hard, and it was in need of a revitalization, which leads us to Paul Tsongas, very famous person around these parts. In the 1970s, he and a group of other people, including Patrick Mogan, had seen potential in Lowell, and they also wanted to work hard to preserve all the different heritage here in the city, whether it be industrial heritage, ethnic heritage. It's what makes Lowell so special and important. And so they worked really hard. Paul Tsongas was a senator. They worked hard, and eventually in June of 1978, President Jimmy Carter signed the bill into law to make Lowell National Historical Park a historical park, which is pretty amazing to begin with. So. All right, what do we have here at Lowell today that you can enjoy? First and foremost, we have the Boot Cotton Mills Museum, pretty much the crown jewel of this park. We have first floor is a working weave room with looms from the 19-teens that are actually making cloth that we sell in our stores. Very cool, very immersive, I might add. The second floor, there are various exhibits, mostly about cotton fabric production, some about people who worked in the mills, and just history of the area in general. Next, we have the Visitor Center at 246 Market Street. I bet a lot of people know about that. Please come in. We have exhibits that cover a little bit of everything you will see at the other locations. A bookstore. We also have a bookstore at the Boot, but the Visitor Center is a great jumping off point for any sort of visit here to the park. We have Into an 1840s boarding house at the Mogan Cultural Center. That is an immersive look of what your life outside of work would have looked like if you were a mill girl. So it's a pretty good example of what, how crowded and how different it would have been for you to come and work here in the city. All right, and we have a brand new exhibit that opened in September of 2023 called One City, Many Cultures. This is one of the newest exhibits in the National Park Service. It's incredible. It's state of the art. It is a brand new, everything is the newest technology you can have in a museum, and it is spectacular. That bottom left corner photo, that is a tree that you can touch, and if you work together, you can make the tree light up. It's pretty neat, and so much time, effort, and work has gone into this exhibit. I highly recommend coming and checking that out. Again, that is in the Mogan Cultural Center, right there with the Into an 1840s boarding house. We have trolleys. The trolleys are coming back in April for the public. We're the only national park site in here in the United States that has trolleys. So I also recommend coming and riding those. Those are pretty great. And a lot of our tours start with a trolley ride. Next, we have canal tours. So you can go out in a boat with a ranger and you're going to head out and explore the canals. Those will be coming back in May. If you're interested in those, you can book those at recreation.gov. The other tour we have is the Suffolk Mill tour, where you go to see the River Transformed exhibit, which is really about how everything was powered. So how turbines worked. We have an antique turbine. Depending on the water levels, we can turn on so that you can see that. And we are just a big part of the city. We do all sorts of things. For example, right there in the center, that's Lowell Folk Festival. You probably see us walking around on that really hot, busy weekend. That's the biggest weekend of the year for us. It's such a fun time. We have the Riverwalk. We have Boarding House Park, where Lowell Summer Music Series has all of their performances. We have UMass Lowell, that is a huge partner with us. They help with Songus Industrial History Center. So Lowell is really a thriving, beautiful place, just like the park. And again, the city is the park, and the park is the city, and the city is the park. And I really want to thank you all for joining me today. This has been a really great experience. This is my first kind of tour talk back since we ended both boat tours back in October, so I really appreciate it, and thank you so much.
So folks, let's give Emma a big virtual round of applause for her wonderful presentation. And we have plenty of time for audience Q&A. If you have any questions for Emma, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. If you have any comments, feel free to type them into the chat. And Emma, the first question is less about the park and more about you. Ellen would like to know, how does one become a park ranger?
Ellen, there are various paths you can take. Really, first and foremost is I recommend to people volunteer or intern at your local park. Get your name out there, get some experience, get on your resume that you have experience working in a national park. The other tip I give people is that if you're going to apply to work for the federal government, you need to put absolutely everything you've ever done on a resume. We don't believe in a one-page resume in the federal government here. So I have a 16-page resume and I'm 32. So just gives you kind of a little bit of a statistic for that to think about. So I recommend doing it, though. We need people.
Jules says, nice job. Bobby says, so enjoyed this. Marie is giving you some emoji round of applause. Sarah says, this was wonderful. I hope to get back there. It's been, gosh, 30 plus years, but I loved the textile museum. Dorit says, thank you for this informative talk. Teresa says, wonderful presentation, very successful first voyage for Emma, and she thanks you. Marianne says, Emma, so well done, inviting info to plan a visit. Nancy says, that was great fun. I had a baby in Lowell nearly 40 years ago, and I really want to go back there and see what it's like now. Julie says, great job. I can't wait to take the tour. Lynn says, enjoyable presentation. Thank you, Emma. Lila, let's say, says, thank you. She took her kids back in the 90s, and she thinks it's time to go again. Let me jump to, Karen says, thank you. Let me jump to some questions now. A couple of people asking about the river walk. An anonymous attendee asks, how long is the river walk? And someone else asks, where does the river walk begin? Where can you park? And is it safe to walk?
Oh, what great questions. First and foremost, as a park ranger, I always suggest going in groups. It's just a lot more fun. You have a good time, and it's just safer that way in general. Nothing is really unsafe here in Lowell, but I do recommend going in groups just because you never know. And we might have a bear, we might have a bobcat, you never know. I am kidding about that, but the Riverwalk has various spots that you can start. I highly recommend coming to the visitor center and parking there. and we can give you a map and give you a great idea on where to start. There is a section of it that is closed various parts of the year, especially due to the water levels. So I recommend coming to the visitor center first, and we can give you a great jumping off point from there. Distance wise, I think it's about 4 miles, but we have a great map that can give you a much detailed thing, and you don't have to do it all at once. You can do sections of it. You can hop on and off, but that is really my favorite part of Lowell National Historical Park is all the canal water walkways and the river walk.
Yeah, a few other questions related to the park, and then we can talk about the history. Eileen asks, is the park open year-round?
Yeah, we are open year round. We modify hours for the winter time. For example, right now, we're open noon to 5 at the Boot Cotton Mills Museum and the Visitor Center, and the Mogan Cultural Center with the boarding house and One City Many Cultures. That is 12 to 4:30, and on the weekends, it's all 11 to 5 or 11 to 4:30. So in the summertime, we do extend those hours.
Christine asks, were the collections from the Textile Museum somehow integrated into the National Park site?
There were a lot of things from the Textile Museum integrated into the park. I wish that museum still was around today. It was what I've heard, an amazing museum, but yes, we do have a large part of their collections. I'm sorry, I don't know where the rest of them went, but we do have a lot.
Francis asks, can people kayak on the canals?
Ooh, I love this question. Unfortunately, Francis, you can't kayak on the canals. We're the only ones that can take a boat out on the canals. It is hard to see, but there is actually a pretty good current that flows through the canals. And if you had some sort of an emergency, it could get pretty dicey. In addition to that, it's pretty hard to get in and out of the canals. And we also don't have the canals full enough for you really to be able to get a kayak in and out.
How long does the season for boat tours last? So when does it start and when does it end for boat tours?
Typically, it's roughly Memorial Day weekend to Indigenous Peoples Day weekend in October. Of course, there's so much development and construction going on in the city. We really are at the mercy of what's happening with that to be able to keep water levels high enough for us to be able to use the canals. So it might vary a little bit year to year, but generally Memorial Day to Indigenous Peoples Day.
Rosamond asks, what month or months are best to visit for and tour? And also she wants to know, how long is the park ranger led tour?
Most tours are roughly between 75 and 90 minutes. It depends on the tour. The park itself, we are a great opportunity all year round because we have indoor activities and outdoor activities. But I recommend coming in anytime between Memorial Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, where we have our full, all of our choices for all of our different activities and tours.
And Marianne, I'm probably, I don't remember the context around the question, but Marianne basically wants to know, what would the approximate cost be for a family of 4 visiting Lowell National Park?
So we are a park that takes interagency passes. So that includes an annual national park pass, or that includes a senior citizen pass, also otherwise known as the Golden Age Pass, if anybody has one of those. So if you have one of those passes, it gets you half off. But for example, for an adult without a pass, it's $6. Senior citizens, it's $4, and it scales down from there. Our boat tours do cost a little more than that. So if you do the math, again, also that information is all on our website at Lowell or nps.gov/LOWE.
Let me jump back to some comments and then we'll talk more with some history questions. So Frank says, bravo, fascinating historical presentation. Robin says, Robin's from New Mexico, says, we did the canal and trolley tour as a visit to the visitor center in 2018 We loved it. Julia notes that my relative, Barilla Taylor, was a Lowell mill girl from Maine. Margot says, great talk. Thank you so much. And let me see, did I ask all the modern day questions? An anonymous attendee asks, can you bicycle on the Riverwalk?
As far as I know, it is allowed. It's not the widest to be able to bike on. So that is at your own discretion. I recommend going and walking it and see if you would feel comfortable biking on it afterwards. But I just have to ask before there's more questions. I just learned about Barilla Taylor, and she is a really neat lady. So I'm really excited to have learned about her.
Eileen says, fantastic presentation. An anonymous attendee asks, well, you know what? We'll save that one if we have time. An anonymous attendee asks, does the mill in the museum run on water power?
That's a great question. It has all been converted to electric now. Unfortunately, the water level isn't high enough to be able to run all those machines anymore. Also, there's just no need to keep the water level at what it would have been in order to run those machines.
All right, so now we'll talk about the Lowell Mill girls. Many questions about them. An anonymous attendee asks, were the Lowell girls staying in boarding houses indebted to the company for room, board, and whatever things they may buy in an on-site store if there was one? Or were they able to gain some financial independence and prosperity? Thank you for this really interesting talk.
So the important thing about Lowell, there's many important things, but something that makes Lowell different from other industrial towns is that it did not have company stores, and you were paid with real money. You weren't paid with company script. So they were able to spend whatever money they made on whatever they wanted. That was not their it was not the mill's prerogative to control that. So there were some girls who sent money home, others saved up, others made sure they had some sort of a dowry. So there were a variety of things they would have used that own personal money on, their own personal money on.
Yeah, you talk about sending the money home. Deborah asks, is it true that the mill girls sent their wages back to New Hampshire to pay for their brothers to go to Harvard?
Some might have. Not everybody would have been required that. We also don't know about, there were thousands of them. So we can't say for certain if there was a majority or not, but we do have some letters that definitely indicate that they did.
Eleanor wants to get a sense of how much the boarding house girls were actually paid.
It was about $1 a week, and that was after the room and board. So in terms of today, that was pretty good.
Yeah, it's one way to look at it. Yeah. Eileen asks, what is the average length of a time a girl would work in the mills? So I'm not sure if she's talking about the hours in the day or just how long in terms of number of years, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so that's definitely not the length of time during the day. I know that it would depend on the mill. They would have to sign a contract. Most of them were either 6 months or a year. And I bet some of that would also have to do with when you came on to work, if it depended if you committed to 6 months or a year. So there was a bit of time they had to do it, but it also wasn't quite like indentured servitude. If you wanted to leave, you could. Obviously, you were just blacklisted from maybe getting hired at that mill again, or from the town. From Lowell, you'd have to go to a different mill town, but it was not like the horrible situations we think of people having to stay for years and years and years.
Dirk asks, did the relative proportions of male versus female workers change over time?
That's a great question. So I'm gonna talk like 1820s to 1870s to start with. women really only did the spinning and weaving, and then a few of the smaller sort of jobs off of that. So inspecting the finished fabric, as well as doing the drawing in. So they set up all the patterns for all the different fabric on the looms. And if you come to the museum, we can teach you more about that. But there were still so many other different jobs that needed to be done that it still was a male dominated industry. And kind of that mill girl era that we talked about is really not even half of the time that the mills were in high production. So still very much male dominated, but the mill girl, like the Yankee mill girl era, is pretty small.
Let's see. An anonymous, we have many similar questions about the legacy of the mill girls. An anonymous attendee asks, what workplace improvements were put in place as a result of the mill girls?
They fought for shorter days is the big thing, the shorter days to work. It took well after that sort of mill girl era. It took into the 1900s to have the 10-hour workday. So that was the big thing they fought for. They also fought for a longer lunch break. They went from 45 minutes to an hour. I believe that was like 1860s, which that's a huge deal, especially if you think about the bell rings and you have an hour to get from, say, the 5th floor of the mill all the way down, thousands of people coming out, and then you have to get to your boarding house to eat, use the bathroom, and then get back up to the 5th floor before that bell rings for you to be back there. So an hour was a big deal.
An anonymous attendee asks, what was the average age of a mill girl, and were there a lot of injuries?
Average age was like roughly 15 to like 26. By the time you're my age, again, I'm 32, you would hope to either be married, in a different career, or transition to something like a boarding house keeper. So that is kind of a big span of ages. As far as injuries, there were lots of injuries. The only problem is that the hospital was owned by the mill companies, so a lot of the records are not as accurate as maybe we would hope today. So as far as injuries, we don't know for sure how a lot of those panned out.
And we're winding down, Emma. I'd say we got about 5 more minutes to go here.
No worries.
An anonymous attendee asks, didn't some mill girls have great experiences living in the city and developed culturally? Lucy Larcom's, Larcom, Lucy Larcom's contributions in poetry, writing, education, etc. Do any of your tours pertain to these aspects of the mill girl's life?
I will give you a condensed version. I feel like whoever brought up the sending money home to New Hampshire to pay for the brother at Harvard has been on one of my Suffolk Mill tours, because I actually talk about on the tours how coming and being a mill girl in Lowell was, even though hard work, it was not the worst thing. It was not so much dead end. It was opportunities for them to grow, just like Lucy Larcom. Her mother, though, she ran a boarding house for a very short amount of time. That wasn't the most successful, but Lucy, she really blossomed in her time there. So this was a great opportunity. I grew up in rural Montana, Northwest Wyoming, and I feel like I'm a mill girl. I would not have gotten to expand my horizons if I didn't move to New England and have had the experiences I've had, again, working in a cotton mill, but in a different aspect. So I think it's all kind of relative, and we do try to focus on some of those stories and the positivity as well, because it's easy, of course, to get bogged down in the negative. But it's Women's History Month, so we are doing all sorts of other great programs on women here in Lowell. If you're interested in that, please go to our social media and website to check those out.
So now we're going to fast forward back to modern day, and we'll end with a few questions about the park. An anonymous attendee asks, is the Morgan Cultural Center free to enter? And do you still have summer camp for kids?
The Mogan Cultural Center is still free to go into, so you can check out One City, Many Cultures and Into an 1840s Boarding House. The only things we charge for are the Boot Cotton Mills Museum and the canal boat tours. The summer camp for kids, we still have, that's through the Songus Industrial History Center and our education division here at the park. So I can't answer as much about that, but you could certainly check their website because summer camp is happening this year. I just don't know if they have availability.
Yeah, and I said Morgan, I meant Mogan.
That's okay, no worries.
You knew what I meant.
Absolutely.
Joanne says the information about the mill girls and their lifestyles were fascinating. Thank you for this presentation. Nancy says, thank you, Emma. Such a wealth of information and so well presented. There's so many different directions I can go. C would like to know, can we buy fabric that was made there online?
You can go through the it was called Eastern National. It's now called America's National Parks. They run our bookstores. They are non-for-profit, but you can contact them through their website and you can email them and chat with them about that, but you can't directly order it online.
All right.
If that makes sense.
Jackie asks, how much of the canal system is open to the boat tour? Years ago, I can remember going underground in a tunnel.
There is one tunnel that you kind of go through. It's a bridge. And we really only go on the Pawtucket Canal. That's the one that's widest for a boat. Any of the other canals downtown really are not wide enough for a boat.
Not sure if you'll know this, but I'll ask the question. Is the Boston Manufacturing Company building in Waltham also standing, and is it a museum?
I believe it is the Charles River Museum. It's on my list to get there.
There you go. And we'll wind down with this question. Emma, what other national parks in Massachusetts do you enjoy?
I don't want my other fellow rangers to get me, in trouble if I say a park I don't know so much about, but I do love Minuteman National Historical Park. I've worked in Boston. I have, a love for that one. As far as others, Springfield Armory, I've heard is pretty interesting. New Bedford Whaling is one that I highly recommend. That is a great park. And I hope to get to the Cape this summer. So I have not done that yet. I'm not a total New Englander, but we'll have to see when I come back if I get to the Cape this summer, what I have to say about that one.
All right. So Emma, I think we'll leave it there. There were a few other questions in the Q&A, but we are coming up on 1:30. And you did address some of the questions at least partially with some of your other answers. So I think I'm good there.
No problem.
Emma, do you have any last words for the audience before we wrap up?
If anybody really has any other questions they want to get in depth about, just ask Robert for my email. I'm happy to chat with people, get you in contact with other people who might know more about your questions or to help you find those questions. But I really appreciate this. This has been so much fun. Thank you. It's been a really great start to sort of think about summer and getting back into tours. So this has been great. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Great job, especially for your first ever Zoom presentation. And
Zoom.
I hope that folks are encouraged and inspired to go visit the Lowell National Historic Park this summer. I think it's a great way to spend an afternoon or a morning. So folks, look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to a feedback survey. I said tomorrow, probably this afternoon, a link to a feedback survey, a link to this recording, and information about some other upcoming virtual programs. And I can include Emma's email address in that email as well. So thank you all so much. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. And as I said, don't forget to vote if you haven't already. So thank you all so much. Have a good one, Emma.
Bye. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye.